Welcome to the No Plateau podcast for stroke and brain injury survivors, their caregivers, and the therapists helping them to break boundaries in their recovery journey. Hosted by Henry Hoffman, a certified occupational and clinical therapist, and Pete Duran, a certified podcast host, CPH. Look it up. This podcast is intended to supplement stroke and brain injury survivors' recovery journey. Therefore, all content affiliated with this podcast is for informational purposes only and is not intended to be a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the No Plateau podcast. I'm your host, Pete Durand, along with Henry Hoffman, who is our sturdy navigator and usual in these episodes. And we're very excited. We've got a special guest, kind of a friend of the Sabo family.
Oh, yeah, we
right,
go
Henry?
way back with Carolyn.
Way back. So Carolyn Brown is with us, and Carolyn is the founder and executive director of StrokeOT. So when you start your own company around stroke, occupational therapy, you must have, A, a passion for helping people that have had a stroke, B, and you must have seen a better way to do it. So we're going to drill into some of that today. So welcome, Carolyn.
Thank you so much. Good to be here.
Yeah, great to have you. And it's 90 degrees in Connecticut today.
It is.
That's worth
We're
noting.
not used to this.
That is in the Carolinas, we're going to see it for the next 90 days. So, Henry, I'm going to kick it over to you. I know that you and Carolyn go back a ways, so let's start maybe with a little history lesson on how we know Carolyn, and then...
That sounds fantastic. Well, welcome, Carolyn. Good to see you as always. Now, when I knew you as Carolyn Lucy, was that right? That was your maiden name back in the day?
That's correct.
We're
Good
talking,
memory.
what, 2004, 2005, something like that?
Exactly. It was about 2004. Yeah.
And you came to one of the Sabo courses. Which course did you come to? Do you remember?
I did. I came down to a course in New Jersey that you were holding. I remember because it was a certification course, and I was number 71 on the list of therapists certified. And I went back to Connecticut, and at that time, I was the only OT that understood at least Sabo orthotics back then. Obviously, they had a different name way back then.
Sure.
I was getting calls from, stroke survivors. There were a lot more stroke survivors that needed to be fit with a SableFlex than there were therapists to fit them. So it was a very busy time, and I greatly appreciate the support from Henry and his brother at the time as they were creating their new business. And it was so exciting to see an OT-led business.
Well, we always enjoyed communicating with you along the way, and from the time you got trained to all the patients you worked with, and your wonderful disposition and how you represent the profession is just awesome. That's why we're so thankful to have you on today. And how about we start at the top? If you could kind of give the audience, now the audience is mixed with patients and caregivers as well as therapists. But if you can at least start off with a little bit more about your professional journey as far as where you went to OT school and your businesses along the way, and where you treated most of your patients.
Well, I'll try to be short because I'm kind of old, so we'll see. But I graduated as a COTA actually in 94 and began working in hospital systems as a traveler, and traveled down south, lived in North Carolina for a while. I'm from Rochester, New York, as Henry's from Buffalo. And at that time, I decided to go back to school to become an OT. Came back up north to Utica College and graduated from Utica College, which they had a wonderful one of the weekend programs. It was like I could work as a COTA during the week, go to school on the weekends, and graduated with my bachelor's. And this would be in 1999, and then I became a traveler again. Started traveling around and ended up in actually in Connecticut. Was working at Gaylord Hospital in Connecticut at that time, early 2000s. And I had a patient that came in one day and said, listen, there's this thing called the functional tone management orthosis. I want to be fit with it. And I, like many OTs, were very client-centered. If there is something to focus on that we think that could be evidence-based, we pursue it. So that's how I became a Sabo certified therapist. I also at Gaylord did a lot of work, obviously, with the neuro population. stroke and brain injury, spinal cord injury, and continued that journey in inpatient and outpatient settings pretty much since the early 2000s up and, till now. I went back, I decided in 2017 to go back and get my doctorate. So I've truly am one of those therapists that have done the journey. I've started as a COTA and ended up as an OTD, and my journey's been long, but it's been worth every step of it, especially getting my OTD. Getting that, I decided, well, I really wanted to become an agent of change. What can I do to really help our profession branch out and pursue other ways to support neuro patients? So I got my doctorate, and my capstone project was to address underserved stroke survivors. I was finding through years of working in outpatient, there was a huge gap in services for stroke survivors that were, number one, prematurely discharged because their deductibles were too high, their copays were $60 per visit, or B, that whole philosophy that still seems to be ingrained in so many clinicians' heads are that there's this plateau in progress after your first year and you're not going to continue. And that sort of was this belief. And I've never believed in that in decades. I've always been there's so much research that shows likewise. So what I did for my capstone thesis was to create a free program for underserved stroke survivors after they've been discharged from therapy. So I created it. I did an outcome measure based on the success of the program. It proved to be very successful. And from that became the sort of the groundings of StrokeOT.
Oh,
So it's been a good experience.
yeah, that's really impressive. So for the folks at home, it sounds like you became a COTA. COTA is a certified occupational therapy assistant, and then you went on to get your OT degree. And then
Bachelor's, yep.
your bachelor's, yep. Gaylord's just a wonderful institution. So I used to live in Stamford, Connecticut, and that's when I used to commute into Burke. And I also had my first job was at Bridgeport, Connecticut. So and I'm originally from
Oh,
Buffalo, so we kind of are following the same breadcrumbs, aren't we, Carolyn?
we are.
Yeah, well, that's wonderful. And then, of course, your thesis that you did for your OTD, trying to serve patients in need through through some type of community program. Did that lead to what is now known as Stroke OT Inc.? Is that correct?
It is.
All right. So
It
if you can
is. I
share a little bit about that, that would be wonderful for the audience to hear and learn about.
absolutely. So, Stroke OT Inc., like I said, it started out as a pilot program as part of my capstone research. And as soon as I finished that pilot program, I literally finished the program in late February of 2020. And you know what happened in March of 2020. So what ended up happening is there were stroke survivors, obviously brain injury survivors also from the community, that were all of a sudden, due to the pandemic, completely isolated. They couldn't attend my in-person program, and I wasn't allowed to run it. So I reached out to some of these people and I said, I could start running the same program via Zoom. Would you be interested in joining? And from that, it's slowly built. I started out with a simple stretching group once a week for 30 minutes. And from that, it started to build. I realized in the fall, probably late summer of 2020, that I really needed help. So I reached out and to the local university, Quinnipiac University, and asked for a level 2 fieldwork student. I said, listen, this isn't your typical fieldwork experience for the student. This is going to be building a program. And I just completely lucked out with a wonderful level 2 fieldwork student, Siobhan Kemple. And she really was a co-founder of StrokeOT. We created a website, strokeot.org. We started to create educational videos for stroke survivors in the community. And our educational videos really are based on health, exercise, and lifestyle education for survivors in the community. And then from that, I had a level 2 student fieldwork student the next semester after her, Michaela Galley, and she continued to help me build. She created all our social media channels, and it was a wonderful experience for them and for me. We then became incorporated as a nonprofit organization in Connecticut in early 2021, and it's taken a year, but just this last week, I received my letter from the IRS saying we're now official 501c3 organization.
Congratulations.
And it's been so now we really can grow.
Normally, we
Obviously,
don't get too excited when we get letters from the IRS, but I think applause is in the opportunity there for you.
I know, I'm holding on to it.
Yeah, so you have so it's a nonprofit, and you're working with clients just in Connecticut. Is that correct?
Because of licensure laws, we're occupational therapists and OT students. We are focusing just on Connecticut at the time.
Okay.
Obviously, with a licensure compact for occupational therapy profession, hopefully things will change. But we're obviously just trying to make sure we're doing things
Right.
I guess, as far as from a licensure standpoint. So yes, we are
Right.
have everyone that are in our groups are from Connecticut.
I want to dive a little bit deeper because this area gets really exciting because it is relatively new, and I know the pandemic has kind of catapulted a lot of professions into the remote world. Do you think stroke community-based programs will take off in the future, and if so, why do you think that?
Oh gosh, I definitely feel so. I feel that there's multiple healthcare disparities for stroke survivors. And I say these disparities start the day they've been discharged from outpatient rehab. They are handed a home exercise program, and they're waved goodbye and said, well, you can come back in 6 to 12 months for a refresher. We as OTs have not, number one, we haven't addressed many times the psychosocial disparity as far as these people are now isolated. We haven't addressed transportation disparity. Many of these people, number one, either cannot drive due to their symptoms, or they are a little nervous to seek out public transportation services, or they can't afford to take a taxi. Or the third thing is a lot of these people don't have family members willing to take them to things other than the standard doctor's appointments. So I feel like transportation disparity and the disparities with psychosocial is huge. Right now, there is a great deal of YouTube search and you will find stroke exercises, and people draw to those stroke exercises. But you got to think, stroke exercises that have millions of stroke survivors following, these people are reaching out too because they want to meet other people. They want that psychosocial connection. And so there I feel that these virtual communities that could be built, number one, address psychosocial needs, and two, take out the need for transportation.
Right.
So it builds communities.
What I'm really hearing is the psychosocial aspect from your perspective is just as important, if not maybe a little bit more important than the physical rehab aspect of trying to get their, leg or arm back. Would you agree with that?
I completely agree.
And you can't
Obviously,
find that.
people
Sorry for interrupting. And you can't find that typically just by doing YouTube videos. What do you think the
No.
magic recipe is? Is it them talking to fellow peers? Is it them talking to you one-on-one? Does groups work? What do you think about all that?
I think it's a little bit of both. I think it's oftentimes exercise groups bring people to the door, but it's the psychosocial connections, it's the emotional connections that people make with each other once they're in that door that make people not want to leave. I feel that communities, when you look on, say, Facebook, there are many young stroke survivor communities on Facebook, or stroke survivor community in the UK, in the US, and I see a lot of these people posting just statements about their lives, like even just general questions about, oh, my AFO didn't work today and I want to get out of my chair, or I need to do this. And sometimes I say to myself, gosh, this just seems like an untapped area where, yes, they're all communicating, but boy, could we have a community where people can communicate live. It can be virtual. And honestly, all of my groups, even though a lot of them involve exercise, I do not mute anyone. I do not turn the video off on anyone. And I really support communication back and forth, joking back and forth.
Yeah.
A little example is there was a gentleman from Germany in my group, and another gentleman that he served in Germany, and he found an old record from that he got from Germany. So he mailed me the record so I can mail it to the other. It's all about just kind of building that community. So long story short, I feel like there's a huge platform that we OTs could build, that could strengthen the community after discharge from therapy.
So, Carolyn, I think we'll want to explore more of that offline
Mhm.
for sure. There's a reason Henry asked that
Okay.
question because we're leaning heavily into this, and we're forming a group of OTs. We obviously feel, and certainly your introduction described why you and Henry get along so well, because it's exactly Henry's thesis on this whole thing, right? But the social aspect is so important.
Huge.
And I think I think we're leaning in not only on therapists and survivors, but those caregivers.
Hmm. Hmm.
I think that's the area where we're starting to see they don't have a support network. There are caregiver groups, but they're not what I'll call neuro specific or stroke specific. And I don't know that they give that social, or that sometimes they just want to vent, right? They just want to say, this is
Hmm.
hard, right? I'm struggling with X. I don't know what to do. It has nothing to do with repetitions or spasticity. It has to do with the fact that that's not my husband anymore.
Hmm.
And how do I handle that? Is there hope? What do I do? So I think it's the reasons why you started StrokeOT are so solid. And I can see why you and Henry got along immediately when you met. Henry, let's drill maybe more into, what you're seeing every day now in your new practice. Where do you see the bright spots, and where do you still see challenges that we as an industry need to overcome?
What I did for Stroke OT is I started to, obviously we're completely volunteer led. Our
Okay.
groups are free of charge. I at the time, as we're now a 501c3, what our plan is to ask individuals or corporate companies to sponsor. We're looking to sponsor, say, 1 month of groups at a time. And that way, I never felt personally, I didn't feel right charging a population that I'm trying to address a healthcare disparity for. Um, but I am supportive of looking into sponsorship programs. So, uh, for example, I've reached out to a local orthotic company and they're interested in sponsoring, and possibly there's a local hospital that would be interested in sponsoring, and then individuals that would be interested in sponsoring, just to keep this program going. Because obviously, on the negative side, it's there's when people say a nonprofit is quick and easy, it's not. There's quite an expense to creating a nonprofit and having it run, especially when it's OT led. Because our liability, professional liability, general liability, all of our malpractice insurance, director and officer coverage,
It
it
adds
ain't
up.
cheap, let me tell you. It adds
Yeah,
up.
it
So,
does.
so that was kind of, from a negative side, it's always comes down to, the cost. But for the positive side, what I decided to do is, rather than advertise to OTs, because I started to advertise to OTs, I wasn't getting anywhere. I wasn't getting the referrals. Instead, I called all the local stroke support groups in my county, as well as the county next to me. And I said, listen, I will come and I will run a live group for you, an exercise group, before every one of your stroke support groups. So people can come in, do a half an hour of exercises with me, and then be there as a stroke support group. And that's how a lot of people have found Stroke OT, is that route. And then I continue to do that. I continue to offer the live exercises. And our exercises have expanded. It's not just exercises. We have a stretching group, an exercise group. We have a chair yoga group. We have a
Oh, I like that
mindfulness
one.
group. And I'm actually now I'm doing a little research on it. I created a occupational performance coaching group based on Graham's method. It's an Australian, I shouldn't call it a model of practice because she calls it an intervention, but technically it takes it. I do conduct the Canadian Occupational Performance Measure at the beginning, individually with each person in the group, and then we work as a team, working on addressing their occupation-based goals as a group, and it's been wonderful. It's been a wonderful experience. So I feel like people want that just as much as they want
Sure,
exercise.
sure.
I think for us, a missing link is a caregiver group. And I think as we grow, hopefully something like that will happen. But if you, obviously, Henry is spot on that as I go to these support groups, stroke support groups, and I see new members coming in with their caregivers, there's always many tiers. There's people that are in the tiers oftentimes come from the spouses or the caregivers. So they're looking for that.
Yeah, I 100% agree, Carolyn. And just so I don't forget to mention this later, we'll put it in the show notes, Pete, regarding Carolyn's company and ways for them to receive funds if you want to donate. That would be wonderful, because what you are doing, you're doing wonderful work,
Oh,
and
thank
it's
you.
important to support organizations like that, and that's something Sabo would like to do as well.
Oh, thank you.
So switching gears just a little bit, but kind of staying in this lane where you're seeing these patients, they've been lost in the system. You're able to put your cape on as best you can, your clinical cape, try to give them a big hug virtually, and support them psychosocially as well as through exercise. We just did a segment, and I'm very curious to get your input. Last week we did a segment on Let's Go Shopping with stroke survivors, where I went on Amazon with Pete, because we know a lot of the patients try to buy stuff
Yes.
to help their recovery improve. Now, I'm going to do a separate segment on activities of daily living aids, so we'll put that aside. But
Great
I wanted to
idea.
get your perspective when we went online, and I shared my screen and I typed in stroke rehab equipment, and we kind of scrolled and said, geez, here's products you should consider. Here's ones you should avoid. Be cautious regarding fraudulent marketing. This one has nothing to do with stroke, because we're trying to save patients from spending a lot of money on things that are useless for their needs. So, knowing you've been in, treating strokes for a long time, and you do have this group, do you see patients going online to buy stuff, and where do they usually go to get it? And what are some of the mistakes that they're making, you think, from your perspective?
Are you referring to adaptive equipment for ADLs, or are you referring to, say, orthotics and e-stim devices for exercise?
So for today, let's talk about more motor recovery, exercise, neuroplasticity stuff.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Well, I mean, yes. People do tend to, Amazon tends to be the place where people tend to gravitate towards. I do have, I mean, obviously I've referred to the Sabo website for decades now, and have had much luck. Patients have, through the years, and I tend to be a big proponent of the Sabo glove and the Sabo stim micro. I love both of them. I think they both work, especially the Sabo stim micro, for a lot of spinal cord injury patients that are missing sensation, as well as stroke patients. But I'm thankful that your company has an easy return policy, a borrow, you can borrow and trial it out and send it back. But people do tend to gravitate towards Amazon, and they do tend to gravitate towards kind of the cheap knockoff versions of eStim devices, or there is like a Sabo Stim micro version on there for like $10, where you get this little glove, and they don't tend to last very long. So I would say, as far as people making purchases that tend to be a waste of money, yes, it's buying sort of the cheaper versions of eStim, neuromuscular eStim, or TENS units. People that go out and buy the cheaper versions of splints, when we want to focus on a splint that's fit properly, for obviously a wrist hand orthosis or an elbow orthosis, and they go out and buy the softest, fuzziest one they can then find, and
Right.
it doesn't necessarily fit properly, and they haven't been taught how to fit it. Again, I think Amazon tends to be a big culprit for everybody. I put on my website, I have a page under orthotics. And I try to explain the difference between a static splint, a dynamic splint, and a static progressive splint, and to really focus on kind of what areas that you should think about if you decide to purchase one of these on your own.
And just for the audience, TENS refers to transcutaneous electrical nerve stimulation, which is more for pain. And those devices, you're right, are purchased all the time. They're usually 20, 30, $40, and
Yeah,
they
yeah.
block messages. TENS is a great tool for people who are suffering from pain, where NMES or EMS, electrical muscle stim, is ones that actually move your muscles and contract your muscles, which is entirely different. But you're right. So that I think from an education standpoint, that is an issue for patients. They do search online a lot. I love Amazon. I use Amazon. It's so
Oh,
convenient.
yeah.
And patients, for the right products, they should definitely think about using Amazon as well. All right. Now, speaking specifically with your stroke treatment, where are you right now? Are you treating stroke patients now anywhere besides your Stroke OT Inc.?
Live,
Yeah.
live
Yeah.
patient.
We'll call them live
I'm
patients.
alive. No, I also have a part-time job at a hospital for special care in New Britain, and I am on I fractured my femur in January, so
Ooh.
I've had a couple surgeries since then. So my plan is to head back to work at the end of June. But yeah, right now it's been wonderful because I've had time now to really put a lot of effort into stroke OT, as well as the research leg of stroke OT, because I'm conducting a research study now. But yeah, the plan is to head back to work, obviously, the end of June. And obviously at the hospital, I do specialize in neuro diagnoses, and I work in an outpatient setting in New Britain.
You've been doing neuro for a long time, and what I love about you is your personality is amazing. And if I was a patient of yours, it's hard to be not motivated because you're so encouraging. So what I want to hear
Mhm.
from you is, how do you keep your patients optimistic? So because it is tough, if I had my personality, if I suffered any injury, I tend to be grumpy, right? And I'm not internally motivated and optimistic sometimes. And that really sets the stage for whatever the recovery is.
So true.
So your patients come into you. How do you keep them optimistic and motivated?
Henry, you hit the nail on the head. And I'm not pointing fingers at OTs out there, but if you decide to be a neuro OT, you have to love it. And you have to believe in
Mhm.
neuroplasticity. And you have to believe that you are their support system for a lifetime. This is not an orthopedic diagnosis where you're done after 6 weeks and you've sent them your way. They will be back and they will be asking you for more questions. And you also, as an OT, very much need to, and I apologize because I could go on my high horse here, but you got to start thinking outside the box of that you're just addressing physical the physical deficits. We as OTs, we are trained in mental health, and we are trained to be pseudo social workers. We are connecting people to services out in the community. So as an OT, it's so important to understand if you feel like you're getting to that point with a patient where they're reaching that typical plateau, you got to put a mirror in your front of your face and realize that plateau may not be the patient's fault. It may be your fault. You may need to
Mhm.
start thinking outside that box. I truly believe early on in when I meet a stroke survivor in an outpatient setting that buy-in is the number one important thing to do. And yes, for the first 6 to 12 months, yes, I'm focusing on ADLs. I'm focusing on, motor recovery, cognition, perception, etc. But if those people come back, if those chronic stroke survivors come back, I need to know that I have a toolkit. And for me, that toolkit happens to be I'm a firm believer in modified constraint induced movement therapy. I feel that it's that, as well as task practice is. Using Sable gloves, using Sable Flex, or not using it, as well as mirror therapy, are my big pieces of my toolbox. And especially with task practice, I create a binder for my patients, and they're given homework each week, just like we did in the old days. Sabo did years ago. We used to have clinics. I remember that I'd have patients go to a Sabo clinic and they would do exercises. They were given homework, and then they'd come back and be told, say, how many Sabo drills they did that day or the next day. I have the same exact similar binder, but I also include the modified constraint induced therapy task practice type of activities. I want to know within 1 week how many times you turn the pages of the telephone book. I want to know how many times that you have opened and closed the drawers of your kitchen cupboards. I kind of put the onus on the survivor. And I feel like when the onus is on the survivor to come back with homework and give it to me and have me look over it, and I'm good. I'm a mother. I'm very good at that guilt look. If people have not done their homework,
You got the
then
guilt look? Uh-oh.
I can give it.
Yeah.
I'm from a long line of German women. We know how to give it.
Oh,
So
that's funny. Well, you
but
bring up
anyway,
you bring up a interesting thing, and I have one more question after this. Your assessment of the timeline of what happens for most stroke survivors is dead on. They have their injury. The hospital does a great job keeping them alive. They then get transitioned to an inpatient rehab facility. They start the recovery process in the subacute stage. A small percentage get a spontaneous recovery. They go home, everything's fine. The penumbra was saved. Vast majority of stroke survivors have lingering deficits, whether it's cognitive communication or physical or vision. Most of the time, what I hear is no one gave me the 30, 60, 90, 120-day plan. I had no idea that I am this stage of the Brunstrom stages. I didn't even know who Brunstrom was, right? That's what they're telling us. And by the way, I didn't realize spasticity is actually a good goal to have if I'm flaccid, as you transition from flaccid to spastic to no spasticity. You can't go right from flaccid, bypass spasticity, and then get hand function. Brunstrom.
When you think about what Carolyn just described, how she approaches each patient, how she's a strong believer in the fact that plateaus are avoidable, right? It's part of your mantra, right? It's part of what your belief system needs to be. When you just, and by the way, I haven't heard anyone describe what you do, Carolyn, in that level of detail or with that thoughtfulness with a patient. So Henry, is this unusual what she's doing? Do we need to get on the rooftops and scream this louder for other therapists to wake up and smell the coffee? I mean, why is this not standard practice? Why is this approach not something every OT takes?
That's a good question. I'm sure Carolyn, I'd like to get Carolyn's answer too, but my sense is, neuro rehab is a small niche market, and not everyone wants to be a neuro. There's therapists that treat neuro, and then there's neurotherapists. That's the difference. And with neurotherapists, these are the
Okay.
folks, I call them neuro nerds. I'm a neuro nerd. Okay. I definitely, Carolyn, you can raise your hand on that one. These are the ones that stay up to date on the monthly journal articles. These are the ones that get extra neuro training. These are the ones that, overwhelming majority of their caseload is neuro. And they've been around the block a couple times. So when you have all that information, and you have the passion to treat neuro patients and the empathy, those are the folks you want to be around if you've suffered a stroke or you're a caregiver. And so my message to stroke survivors and caregivers listening is, and we're going to do a segment on this, is you got to interview your occupational physical therapist. You have to interview them, and you have to ask them basic questions. How long have you been treating neuro patients? What percentage of your caseload is neuro patients? For instance, do we really want to go to a Bill's physical therapy clinic where they advertise nothing but post-operative hip and knees and shoulders, where they probably only see the occasional stroke survivor? Is that your best clinic to go to? Or do you want to go to someone who's 80% neuro on their caseload? And then you want to ask them questions like, do you embrace evidence-based technology? And do you embrace evidence-based research? And if so, let's do our homework and list a few of the things that they do. And it's super easy for patients and caregivers to go on to places like PubMed and type in. PubMed is where they have all the journal articles, or you can go to Medline, and you can type in literally. Let's say the clinic says, "Yeah, we love to do mirror box therapy." You brought that up, Carolyn. You can type in mirror therapy and stroke and see all the articles to see if that's even a effective treatment, which it is. And then, so when you do your homework, you interview the therapist, make sure it's the right therapist. And then at that point, you've done everything you possibly can do to set yourself up for success. But Carolyn, that's my 2 cents. What about you?
Oh, Henry, you well said, and it's such a loaded subject because you don't want to want to have colleagues feel that you're pointing fingers. But you're right. You can either be a therapist that treats neuro or a neurotherapist, and it's trying to weed out for the stroke survivor as well as their caregiver. It's trying to weed out who is who. And honestly, I do a little looking online. I do see these posts here and there from stroke survivors as well as their caregivers saying just that. Like, they'll say, I love my therapist because they're a neurotherapist. And then you see, 30 other stroke survivors saying, where is that therapist? Because it's, they're trying to find these folks, and it's not easy to find. The idea of buy-in and having a therapist understand that they need to create their own toolkit that promotes buy-in for their patients is crucial in not having a frustrated patient.
I agree. And I always joke, it's like, are you really going to get seafood at a steak restaurant? So, that's kind of our profession, right? All right. So, Carolyn, last question for you. Stroke, treating stroke has been decades of examples where clinicians have tried to wrestle with stroke recovery. And, we've been making some nice progress. Obviously, we just learned just a few decades ago that the brain's no longer hardwired, right? We thought it was hardwired. So we're going to see more progress. As a clinician, where do you see us 20 to 30 years from now? We all have these stories. We're all at happy hour talking about this. Do you see significant changes? You see very subtle changes? What's going to be different, in your opinion, 20 to 30 years from now from a rehab recovery standpoint for stroke survivors?
Yeah, I definitely see telehealth expanding exponentially. Even though people thought it would go away after the pandemic, I feel like it's a way to reach out outside your local area. I feel also it addresses so many disparities for these isolated stroke and brain injury survivors. So telehealth number one, I see it going in that direction. As far as it's interesting, I'm sort of an old school OT. Obviously, I'm an NDT trained OT, and it's hard for me to see that NDT isn't necessarily as evidence based as they thought it would be, whereas things like some of the virtual reality is. And because I'm such a hands on person, so but it doesn't mean that I should not expand my thought process and look into more virtual reality as intervention for my patients. So
NDT for the patients and caregivers is neurodevelopmental treatment approach. It's an approach that's been around for decades. It's a theoretical approach. We learned it in school along with fancy ones called PNF and Brunstrom, of course, we learned, as well as motor relearning program. These are all just different theories, some proven to be more effective than others that we learned in school. But NDT, for the most part, in the 80s, 90s, really did a good job with their marketing. It got to the point where therapists had to get NDT trained and put it on their resume.
right,
And oddly
yeah,
enough, that was founded by the roots of Bobath. Oddly enough, there was no evidence to say it was superior than any other approach, but you needed to have it in your resume. It's crazy. So with more science, more data comes and more truth comes. And what they found was, in fact, no, you don't need, it's good to be trained in different things, but it doesn't mean it's going to be the primary focus, nor is it superior to other types of treatment. And in fact, they learned what we know now, which is high repetitious strength training. By the way, strengthening was a no-no for NDT therapists because they thought you were going to increase spasticity. So, so NDT had to take a little bit more of a correction in their approach, and now they embrace task training and all the other evidence-based parts and added it to their treatment approach, their theoretical treatment approach. So what I love though is what you just said. Even though you spent thousands of dollars getting your certification in NDT, I know it hurts. Your number one goal is not to humble yourself, right? Your number one goal is to help others. So you
absolutely.
swallowed some of that potential pride and said, you know what? With everything in stroke recovery in life, we evolve, and we may not know something that we now know, a few years later. So you've decided to shift, pivot, embrace more science, and come up with a new plan. That's great. There's a lot of therapists that don't do that, and I feel really sorry for those patients that are stuck with those therapists that are very single-minded, because it's kind of like that. What do they call it? Sunk cost bias, where hey, I invested $5,000 into NDT. That's all I'm going to do because that's where I put all my money in. And times change. So that great job there, understanding the difference. And again, it goes back to patients and therapists, or excuse me, patients and caregivers doing the research and interviewing their therapists to make sure they're up to date on the latest. Because what worked potentially 20 years ago is not what's going on today in the stroke world.
No. And as OTs, we owe it. We need to be client centered. We're one of the only holistic, medically based professions out there, and we need to be the ones that are willing to look beyond. And a side thought too is though I've been, doing. I went back. It was about 2010. Went down to was it South Carolina? I was trained in the Dr. Taub's clinic
Yep, in Birmingham,
at
Alabama.
University of Birmingham, Alabama, and I'm even though that was years ago, it still is shown to this day as task practice, which is like a modified version of modified construment therapy, is so evidence based, and I'm a firm believer of just continuing with that. I hope that continues to grow, and more orthotics and e-stim devices come out that are supporting that intervention.
And Pete, my final thought and message to patients is, if you ever, and this happens still today, I just had a conversation last week with a family member of a patient. If you ever engage with a therapist that says there's only one approach that's going to improve the loved one's arm or hand or leg function, get your keys and run for the parking lot and go as far away as possible, because that right there, folks, is fraud. There's not one approach that's going to improve a patient's outcome. It's going to take a whole village of evidence-based treatment approaches. And sadly, there is still a group out there, I'll not mention their name, that believes their approach is the only approach to getting the arm and hand back. And that approach results in people going to their clinic almost forever so they can lay their wonderful hands on them to try to get the magical results that they pretend to see. And of course, when you Google this approach or go to PubMed, there's no evidence to support it. So I'll leave you with that one tip, folks. Make sure that the therapist is doing multiple evidence-based strategies to help in the recovery. Final words, Pete?
Carolyn, when we originally came up with the concept for the show, I hadn't met you yet, but I think Henry had you in mind as he was thinking of this. He had to have, because we talked to a lot of therapists, we talked to a lot of survivors, and we talked to a lot of caregivers, and you seem to have your finger on the pulse of all three of those audiences and the gaps that we all see. It's why we get up every day to do what we do, is just to challenge conventional thinking, right? If you don't continue to innovate and challenge, you never move forward. And as Henry mentioned earlier, I think your passion and enthusiasm for what you do is contagious.
That's very kind of you. I have had obviously wonderful stroke survivors as patients who have really been my cheerleaders throughout this process, so I thank them. But I've also had great students, and now I have a 9-person board of directors that is just like cheering me on from as I sit and through the mounds of paperwork through the state and the federal government trying to get things. So I don't think I could have done it without sort of the support of folks around me. So it's we just had on Sunday, we just got together to celebrate StrokeOT as a 501c3. We just had a sort of a celebration at a local farm brewery, and it was just so neat to sit around with caregivers and survivors and students, and just had a picnic and have fun together. And I think it's all about that too,
Yeah,
it's
well, you
understanding.
had me at
That's
the beer
wonderful.
part, but I would have came anyway.
Next one, Henry, you come on up.
Please,
Next one.
Well, Carolyn, thank you so much for joining us today, and I think inspiring not only therapists but caregivers and survivors that there's people out there like you.
Oh, thank you.
And I think we need to, Henry and I, we definitely want to talk offline because we want to figure out how to get more people plugged into what you're doing.
I'd love to have
and then
people
maybe
join.
help.
That'd be wonderful.
Yeah, and I think we want to talk about how to help you scale it across the country, right? There's other people that could benefit from this. So let's continue to explore that.
Thank you so much. And it was wonderful being here chatting with both of you.
Well, thank you, Henry. Great job as usual. Thank you for navigating, and thanks for those folks that listen to the No Plateau podcast. Like it, share it, tell other people about it. We certainly appreciate it. We'll see you on the next episode.
Thank you for tuning in to the No Plateau podcast. Please make sure to like and subscribe to stay up to date on more stroke and brain injury recovery stories. The No Plateau podcast is intended to give you an insight into stroke and brain injury survivors' journeys. Any opinions given on this podcast are strictly the individual's, and we do not suggest that you necessarily hold the same viewpoints as anyone on this podcast. This podcast is intended to supplement stroke and brain injury survivors' recovery journey. Therefore, all content affiliated with this podcast is for informational purposes only and is not intended to be a substitute for professional medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Always seek the advice of your physician or other qualified health providers with any questions you may have regarding a medical condition. Reliance on any information provided by the No Plateau podcast is solely at your own risk.